and welcome back to Joygasm, where we chat about video games, movies, and pop culture. I'm Russ, Xbox Live Toaster 360, and of course, Steve is still absent from the studio. I don't know where that fella is. I'm gonna go out and find him, though. In the meantime, however, we are going to kick off episode 74 on this June 2nd, 2018. Today's episode is part 2 of the Jesse Snyder interview from last week's episode. If you haven't heard part 1, I strongly recommend you check it out as he reveals what it's like working on the Call of Duty series, his creation of COD Zombies, what he did before getting into the game industry, and addressing Treyarch, changing the origin story of his involvement with COD Zombies. So without further ado, let's jump into part 2 and see what he has to say about his time working on little projects like Halo 4.
So then went up to, it was just called Halo Internal Studio, super generic. And I was the first designer hired out of kind of Microsoft. We had a creative director at the time. His name's Ryan Payton, and he ended up founding a studio called Camouflage. He was like the first creative director there. And then, started hiring on all these really great folks, made a bunch of good friends there. I'm still friends with a lot of those people today. Like every E3, we hang out and all that good stuff. So we just started, it was crazy because when we started that game, that was an Unreal Engine game. And I think it was like Unreal 3 or something. Mm-hmm. And within the span of like 2 months of me being there, all this licensing stuff went down, and basically Microsoft acquired the Bungie tech. And then I was kind of in charge of like trying to figure out with like another guy to how to make a game in the Bungie engine without any documentation, which was like just crazy insane.
They didn't provide anything, huh?
Nope. It was like, they didn't really have anything, it was like they'd been making games, and it was a lot of like tribal knowledge at the studio. It was like the Halo 1 and Halo 2 and Halo 3 engine. And, a lot of those people were still there at the time. And so we just started trying to figure out how to make a game out of it. And we were like looking at GDC talks, and like, it was like we couldn't talk to like Bungie people because of like legal issues and stuff. So,
gosh, that's gotta be frustrating.
It was crazy, yeah. But like, my specialty is like modding and stuff, right? So I can kind of get into game engines and try to figure out like how stuff works. So,
and
so
we
ended up making.
Sorry to interrupt you real quick. What was your job title when you joined 343?
When I started, I was senior designer, but then like after like a year or two, they made me lead campaign designer. Okay. So then they just gave me the vision of like, they're like, okay, like, because basically I was the one like pushing all this stuff forward, with like a couple other people, and so. They kind of put me in charge of like the gameplay vision, basically of the campaign, kind of trying to figure out how to like tie narrative and the the gameplay together and all that stuff. So, it's funny because I did a lot of hands-on work really early on in that game, and then as it went on, I did less and less because we started hiring people, and I was kind of like, hey, this, it was more like kind of like watching over stuff, and I would jump in and write systems if people needed them, like. I ended up writing, what was the thing called? The Mammoth, like that Mammoth. The big giant, like movable, like vehicle thing. Cause that was like we were like, we want to do a Scarab, but different, and so we did like that thing. And I ended up writing the kind of core system around how that thing shoots and all that stuff. So
okay, I've got to stop you yet again because I'm grinning ear to ear because I don't know if this was intentional or not, but that vehicle, when I was playing Halo 4, totally brought me back to my childhood when I collected G.I. Joe, because that thing looks so close to, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's called the Rolling Thunder. Have you ever seen that? Okay.
I should look it up.
When we're done with this, do like an image Google search of G.I. Joe Rolling Thunder. And I'm telling you, dude, that thing, it looks like Rolling Thunder version 2.0 or something.
That's funny.
It was one of my favorite vehicles as a kid growing up. And looking at that in the game, I'm like, yes!
That's awesome.
It's just the coolest thing. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
That's cool. It's funny because the guy that ended up making that level for real, like, the real designer on that level he works at Bungie now. So he's like, I'll tell him you liked it. And I think Vic De Leon, he's like one of the artists that was there. He left, but I think he's doing like VR stuff now, but I think he's the one that modeled the Mammoth. But
oh dude, that was a labor of love right there. Anyway, continue, please.
Yeah. So, so I just I worked on some core systems, and then, we knew that we wanted to do like the Promethean kind of Forerunner bad guys to mix it up, because again, it's like, are we just going to do the same thing? Like, are we going to do more Halo, or are we going to try to do something different here? And so
Absolutely.
we were like, hey, let's and again, maybe being too ambitious, but we were like, let's make a good Halo game. That's like number one, but let's change some things, let's like add some new stuff. Let's add some spice. So, things like the Mammoth came in, but we, as a team, we needed to just figure out how to make a regular Halo game, right? Like, we had never made a game together before. And then you're asking a team to make a Halo game, which has all these kind of like all this baggage if you get it wrong, Right. And so, but yeah, so Prometheans, we were looking at enemies and we're like, the Flood are kind of terrible. Like they're not, like they make sense for the narrative, but they're not really fun to fight against. No one knows how to kill them properly. People just shoot them a bunch until they fall apart or whatever.
Well, and they're honestly, they've at this point when Halo 4 was being developed, it was kind of played out. The Flood served its purpose for Halo 1, 2, and 3. But after that, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, no, it was cool there, but if you guys keep rehashing this, it's just not going to make any sense. But.
Yep, that was exactly it. So we're sitting there thinking like, well, let's continue the story, right? So it's like you're on the Forward Unto Dawn, and you're derelict in space, and we kind of were like knew we had to do Master Chief. Like, that wasn't even up to us as a design team. It was just like, this is what you're doing. But and that's like, hey, everyone loves Master Chief, right? Like, and everyone wants to see what happens next with Master Chief. And so yeah. That was I'm trying to think of all the craziness that went on in that project, because there's a lot of it. But yeah, it was just like, let's figure out what the new enemy types could be. Let's figure out new weapons. Like, that stuff's important. Let's do a new setting, like new environments. And if I always thought Forerunner environments were like really cool. And so we ended up going to what was it, the Didex like planet or whatever, that we ended up getting like sucked into that. And now you're supposed to be on this like Forerunner planet, and that's supposed to be crazy or whatever. And then you finally get to meet these like, we were trying to okay, you're going to meet these new enemy types. And like we I think the first time you meet them is like you land and you see these like dog creatures and you're like, what the F are these? And then, and then it's like you start winding up to like, hey, we're going to get to the knights, the Promethean knights or whatever. I think that's and I'm going to get my like dev terms and my like ship terms confused because I don't. What were the dogs named Crawlers or something? I can't remember, because when we were making them, they were called Pawns. So all right, so I had the original design for the Forerunner enemies, and they didn't turn out exactly how I wanted to. They got changed by we ended up like splitting the kind of way that the game got made, because at first we just didn't have like a real sandbox team in place, and so we were like coming up with enemy designs and we were coming up with all kinds of stuff, and then eventually like the sandbox team took over enemy designs and kind of made them their own. But the way that I originally designed the enemy types was around chess pieces. So it was like like pawns, knights, kings, and queens.
That's so cool.
And so the pawns were supposed to be like the dogs, and then the knights were the knights, obviously, and then the bishops were the flying ones. So they would like heal people, and like they would kind of mess with you. And
stupid things were so annoying, but yet
right?
Like you could tell like that added threat to what the situation was.
Yep. And so you're kind of like, when you're in, like Halo combat, right? You sit there and you think about how am I going to solve this combat puzzle? Like, am I going to shoot the grunts first, or am I going to try to like take the shields off the elite and take him out, and then throw the grunts into disarray and then mop them up, or so we kind of wanted like a similar I don't know, like set of enemies that kind of like had those kind of like different like push points and stuff. So it was funny because the bishops, I don't know if you remember, they like threw grenades back at you.
Oh, yes.
And that was like directly inspired from Call of Duty, because I sat down one day and I was like, how come enemies in Halo don't throw grenades back at you like they do in Call of Duty? And so then we had these flying enemies, and one of the programmers like made him like shoot a beam out and then like throws a grenade back at you. And I was like, yes, this is like perfect. So we're doing it, like AI can do advanced things now in Halo, so yeah. So, and it was funny because the original night design was very different, and I liked it a lot more than what it ended up being, because I know that the knights get a lot of flack for being like bullet spongy kind of enemies, but the original design was they rolled into balls, so kind of like Metroid. Oh. And so what they would do is they would like they would turn into these like metallic spheres and they'd roll around, and then they could like that way they could like roll behind cover quickly and do all that kind of stuff. And if you shot them as a ball, then they'd like pop out and you could like kind of finish them off. But the idea was that they'd roll behind cover and then like pop up from behind cover and like shoot at you and maybe strafe a little bit, then like kind of pop down into a ball, roll somewhere else. And it was super fun and like it was totally working. But it was one of those things where it was like kind of the Halo IP people were like, this is too much like Metroid, and like it's like metal balls and stuff. And I'm like, so what? Like it's a video game, like it's fine, and they're like, yeah, but it's sci-fi and it's like Metroid. And I was like, ugh. So then and then eventually the designs got handed off to other people and they like redid the art of them a bunch, and then they ended up kind of being like more bullet spongy. But yeah, that was kind of a bummer. So there's another feature that you asked for earlier that like didn't make it in or something. So
yeah,
it's like the original night design I thought was really fun, and I think like more games should do enemies like that. But
the Prometheans. Well, before I get into that, so for me, Halo is one of my all-time favorite game franchises ever.
Oh, cool.
Just Halo is, Halo multiplayer. I'm pretty proficient. I can hold my own in that, as opposed to Call of Duty, where I'm just about as useful as a poopy flavored lollipop. But Halo is absolutely one of my all-time favorite games, and so I'm very curious to hear you talk just about some of this behind the scenes stuff regarding Halo 4, because Halo 4 was a departure in many different ways from what we had seen from Halo 1, 2, 3, Halo Reach. Obviously Bungie was passing the torch over to you guys, and I, for one, as a gamer, like I was ready to see a new class of enemy, because we had dealt with the Flood, we had dealt with it's so funny. I just said I'm a huge Halo fan. I'm totally forgetting.
The Covenant.
The Covenant. My gosh. So anyway, like I was ready to see something new, just because here we were in this type of environment where Master Chief is going all over the universe. I mean, he's going to these exotic alien planets. Why is it that all we ever see are the Covenant or the Flood? Like there needs to be something new that's being introduced here. And of course, it made logical sense just to be able to explore more of the Prometheans, explore more of the Forerunners, have that narrative be pushed forward. And as a result, I mean, just the way that I'll just call it like the species, so to speak, of the Prometheans, the way that they fight and the way that they move around and strategize is very exclusive to them. It did not feel at all like the Covenant did. Obviously, the Covenant has their own kind of feel with the grunts and with the units and so on and so forth. But I loved how there was a very different vibe with them when you came in contact with them, where like I was forced as a gamer to all of a sudden change up my strategies that, quite honestly, were like, they're almost like I was conditioned as a gamer to like, oh, if I see an elite, I'm going to shoot him a few times. I know he's going to dodge and roll behind cover, in which case I'm going to throw a plasma grenade. It's going to flush him out. I'm going to finish him off with a shotgun. That no longer applies when I'm fighting against the Prometheans. And so it's interesting to hear. I mean, is it safe to say that when you were working with the Promethean class, is that one of the pillars for you personally as a game designer when you were working on Halo 4?
Yeah, I mean, like Halo enemy design is all about like hierarchy, like how these, I was kind of alluding to it earlier, but it's like, if you're like you say, it's like, hey, do I take out the elites first, or the brutes, and do I send the grunts into disarray? Do I take them out? Or, oh no, there's jackals, I gotta like deal with that now. Or like, hey, there's two hunters, I gotta figure this out. So they're like combat puzzle-y, but they're kind of like interwoven, right? And then you start to mix and match those elements together to create like different kinds of meals, I guess, as it were.
Yeah.
And so that's like, and that's like a core design tenet for Halo enemy design, right? Is like how can you develop these hierarchies in a way? And when we started out, we were like the hierarchy was basically just like elite, grunt, and so on, and then it was just boring. We're just like, well, it's too similar. You got to do something different. So. And then we're like, hey, there's these Prometheans and they're crazy, like, and they're supposed to be like future, like, and old at the same time. They're like so old that they're so futury at the same time. It's like mind bending, right? So how can we develop kind of, combat behaviors that make sense for like a human, basically, superhuman to fight, but that aren't so OP, and so, we like I said, we thought about like, and flying enemies are always fun, 3D navigation, but well, I should say they're almost never fun, but like they're fun to design for, I guess. And so they're really easy to like kind of screw up. So we made the I think they're called Watchers maybe when they shipped.
Yeah.
But we made them like really slow and kind of easy to shoot, but they'd like soak up a little more damage. But then they could fly away faster. Like I think when you start laying into them, and like design goals was like, ooh, they should feel like when you pop a balloon. Like I wanted them to feel like they would like if you shot them, they would like almost like burst like a balloon, like with the air getting let out of it,
kind of thing.
Yeah, and like they'd like fly around the environment and crash into things and stuff, or but then they were supposed to be like the support class, like, and so that was like different, right? Then like when you think about like jackals and grunts, they're just more guns that have like different like gun kind of abilities. Mm-hmm. But then it was like, ooh, but what if we had this other enemy type that really wasn't about shooting, it was more about buffing the other characters, and so that's kind of the first thing you really want to take out, and so that, but and then it was like, then we didn't have a gun on him, so people were just like, we get in these situations where he'd clear out everything in the level, but then they'd have these bishops flying around with like nothing, or like Watchers flying around with like they couldn't do anything to you. So we were like, okay, well they need to attack you, they need to do something. So this is because quickly run into these edge cases as you're like testing stuff out. But yeah, it was like it was interesting, right? And the elites are basically like, when you think about like the way Halo enemies are broken down, it's like grunts are just that. They're meant to be like fodder, and then jackals are like a step above that, and they're kind of an annoyance. But then elites are like, they're supposed to be able to like be 1-to-1 with like Master Chief. Mm-hmm. And then hunters are like in the next step up, right? And so we kind of thought along those lines where it's like, well, the knight has to be the kind of equivalent to Master Chief for balancing purposes. The bishop is kind of like the jackal in a way, and then the pawns or whatever they're called, the crawlers, I think.
I think you're right. Are the crawlers.
Yeah, they're like the grunts, right? And then and then you get into all kinds of other crazy situations. There's like, people don't like enemies that walk on walls, or it's like hard to headshot them and stuff. And so we spent time trying to work on that. But yeah, it was a very different, like it was super fun to design those enemies at first, and then try to like get them into the level. Actually, that's another kind of funny thing is we never, like when we started, we didn't really have them fully developed until a couple of years in, and so we were just using the Covenant enemy set as stand-ins, and so we didn't even know if a lot of the environments were going to be set up well enough to because typically you want to like design combat environments around the enemy type that you're going to be using kind of hand in hand, and we weren't able to do that in a lot of cases, so we just sort of hoped it worked, and then we had to make some minor adjustments, but that was kind of maybe why it didn't feel as finished as it could have. But
in addition to the Promethean classes, what did you also have a hand in just the actual weapons of the Prometheans?
Weapons were not so much. Weapons when I was when we were just kind of ideating all of this stuff, I was like, hey, it would be cool if like we had lots of kind of like the Forerunner weapon should feel crazy. Like I'd imagine like all the ammo would always be floating on the outside of the gun. Mm-hmm. And so then you could always see like the ammo. And then as you shoot it, it like puts itself in the gun and fires out. And then when you reload, like the ammo, like you're like, I don't know, you're like opening up a pouch or I don't know, something. And it like the ammo comes out and it like kind of like sticks to the outside of the gun and whatever. But it's kind of like either, you can imagine like magnetic forces or some hard light kind of something around there. Mm-hmm. But then we did this like research, like we did this like internal like user research stuff at Microsoft, and we kept getting this data back, which is like people just like the Marine guns, like the human guns the most, like by a lot. And people typically just don't like the Covenant guns. Like people don't usually pick up plasma rifles or like, they'll pick up plasma pistols, but only to like drop shields. And that's only if you're like somebody that has that institutional knowledge and really cares about like, being the most efficient when you're playing through it.
I will have I am a fan of the Needler.
Yeah. And the Needler's fun. Like I like the Needler. Yeah. Like who doesn't, right? Creates that big boom at the end.
Very satisfying.
Yeah. But, it's like if you're sitting there with like, do I want the like Covenant sniper rifle or, the beam rifle or whatever, or like the Marine sniper rifle, like you always pick the Marine one,
That's
like,
true.
Get it. So, it's just like, it's just one of those things where people tend to be more like they just want to be around things that they're familiar with, so like weapons that they are familiar with are the ones they're going to be drawn to, and like alien weapons are always a bit off-putting to certain people. Even if you're like into Halo, you're like, I'd rather just if I can get the BR, I'm going to get the BR, so when we started developing the Forerunner weapons, that we kind of ran into that problem. And so and I wasn't kind of beyond that, I wasn't too much involved, but just kind of looking in, I know that they balanced them to be more like the kind of Marine, style weapons, like that faction. But the look and feel is still very kind of alien, But they kind of just felt like I think they ended up kind of just feeling like, oh, it's an AR, oh, it's a pistol, oh, it's a SMG, but it's Forerunner, So,
I will say that is a critique I do have about the weapons, just from a standpoint that they are very alien. I did feel as though the way that they would fire was too much in line with what you're describing. Like, I think I probably would have preferred to have seen something that was a bit more exotic from that standpoint, but it's just a nitpick of mine.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, you can critique all day. Like that's kind of like, and that's the other thing is like when you're like working in game design, all you hear is like critiques. And so I'm just like totally used to it. So it's almost like weird when I hear people say like, I like the thing you did. Yes, it's like, what?
And you're like, wait, what?
You do? Does that mean I have to stop working on it? Or
I don't even know what to say to that.
Yeah. So I hear you.
Your focus was on more of the campaign, you said, right?
Yeah.
So can you divulge a bit more into just what your daily tasks were as it applies to more of the campaign side? Because I'm tempted to say it's not exactly defining the narrative. You're focusing more on the gameplay mechanics, right?
Yeah, well, so like as like, campaign lead, it's more of design. It's like I'm protecting the design, like the gameplay design of the game. Because you do have a narrative team and they're going to want to do all kinds of stuff, but they might ask for some things that end up breaking like a piece of combat or the flow of a level or whatever, right? And so it's a lot of like me working with the narrative team, trying to like, make compromises or say no or, say yes to, various things that are happening on their end, and trying to fit in, they might want some like mechanics that they want to like have it play out at certain places. Like, I think they had these like little, like terminals you could interact with, and then you can find narrative. And so like, hey, where are we going to put those? That kind of stuff. But mostly it's like me, just working with the other designers on a day-to-day basis, like sitting down, playing their stuff, giving them like feedback, like combat feedback, trying to make adjustments with them. Hey, try this. What if we change the enemy set here to something else, or take some of these guys out, or add a sniper rifle here. That could be cool, and then going to like focus. So we do a lot of focus testing, at least at Microsoft. So working with them on like focus testing the game and trying to look at the data and not like, cause you get data back and it might, you have to interpret it, data is just data, right? So you have to kind of look at the data and say, what are they actually saying here? Oh, like the player died way too many times here. It's like, well, did they? It's okay. This is a hard part, like stuff like that. So, because you don't want the whole game to just feel flat, so you need to find those like peaks and valleys and kind of look at the overall pacing of the campaign. And so it's a lot of that stuff. It's just day to day, like a lot of playing the game and giving feedback, and then kind of filling in where needed. So like I said, like, hey, here's a system, to write up. Okay, cool. Like we're shorthanded. I'll write that system up.
And so your coding skills are still coming into play very actively.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting because they had, I don't know if you know much like about coding languages, but there's this programming language called Lisp, and
I've heard the name. Obviously I've never used it.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's basically like, I think it's a prefix notation. I want to say it's prefix. So like if you're going to multiply numbers, like normally in any other programming language, you do like 2 times 5, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this one was you'd put the operator first. So you'd put like multiply. So you'd be like multiply and then like 5 and 2. And you're like, okay. And so you're reading all this code where you see like, it's like minus 5, 3. And you're like, what is that? And you're like, oh, you're subtracting 5 from 3 or whatever. You're like, why would you do this first? And it's just the way that programming languages written for like Bungie, like back in the day, and the people just started using it and they got used to it. And everything has parentheses. So if you're like your programmer, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's like all just parentheses everywhere. There's no semicolons. There's no brackets or braces. It's all just parentheses. And so one of my first orders of business was like, okay, this has to be done now because nobody can use this, and we're not going to teach people how to use this archaic language. And so we converted it into a more like Lua-like language, which is like more like modern programming language where things actually kind of make sense and line up, and you can, your brain works in that order. Like if you've learned any programming language in the last like 20 years. So that was like, and then like we got a lot more productive. We were able to iterate on the levels a lot faster because people were able to code in a way that made sense to them, So, yeah.
Now, big question for you. Since we're talking about critiquing, I would like for you to give your high-level critiquing of Halo 5.
Can I admit that I've never played it?
Yes, you totally can.
There's another. So that's another one where Halo 4 comes out, and we're about to go on to Halo 5, and again, like creative differences and political stuff pops up. And a bunch of us leave, and some of us stayed there. And then I think like everyone from that core, like Halo 4 team on the design side has left, or, there might be like one or two people there still. And, that's another one where I'm like, I started that game out. I actually started on pre-production on Halo 5, and it was, meant to be a very different sort of game. And, it was going to be more of an open world kind of game where I know enough about the game, so I know there's like different planets you go to, and there's Locke and that kind of stuff. And I kind of know a bit about why that ended up being that way. Like it's like, hey, we want to do universe expansion, and let's introduce new characters that are cool, so we don't always have to just rely on Master Chief, right? Which totally makes sense from like an IP standpoint, right? But the game was meant to be like, I almost call it like kind of like an XCOM, but like first person ish. It's hard to explain, but like, the original concept was you were going to land on these different planets, and like each planet had a different story for a different like main character. So like one would be like Master Chief, and then one would be like Locke or whatever, and then one was going to be like Arbiter, I think. Mm-hmm. And then each planet had a different story, but each planet started like very light. So like with nothing on it, and then over the course of time you would like build up that planet's base. So you were like, all right, like you Chief and a couple Marines land on this Forerunner structure, and let's explore. And you just kind of go around the area, and you like uncover like Forerunner artifacts, and and those are kind of like the breadcrumbs that like get you to the narrative, to the main narrative. And then so it was like hub and spoke, where you had like these big levels that would arc off of these hubs. And then those were the big scripted main Halo levels. But then when you came back to the hubs, then you could like build up your base, and you could explore in that immediate hub area and build up your base more and more, and like build up defenses, and you could unlock the vehicle bay, and then you could get the Warthog, and then you could drive the Warthog around and like do all that kind of stuff. And then you could take that design and like, you can imagine like, oh, now the scientists show up because you advanced that part of the story, and the scientists need to go scan the foreign artifacts. So now you do like, I know it's terrible to say, but escort mission, right? Where like you have to defend the scientists to get to the foreigner artifact, and like you bring them back, and then that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then you take that design and you multiply that across different planets, right? So now like Arbiter's doing a similar thing on his planet, in his homeworld maybe or whatever, and then like you have this new character Locke, or maybe somebody from Blue Team or whoever. I don't even think it was Locke at the time, but you have some other characters doing that on another planet, and then like those stories converge at the end in some cool way. And then the idea was that like you're getting all these characters back at your base, and you're building up their narrative, and you're kind of interested to see like who's there and like what's changed. And then the kind of like big twist was going to be that like co-op was played like kind of like Firefight was played at your bases. So now now is like, people like you can engage, you can like say, let's start Firefight at our base. Like I'm at this point in the story and I got it all built up. Let's play Firefight. And then like now you have like your Firefight gameplay there and built around those bases, but it's more like custom to you because you're the one like pouring your resources in and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought that was like a really sick design, and I was like super stoked to like start making it. And then it was just like, hey, we're gonna really just focus on narrative, and we kind of like some of these ideas, but maybe they're too ambitious. And then a bunch of people left, and then things started getting scaled down, and I was like, okay, and then it was like time to go basically. And and it was like, hey, like that was at the point where I was getting sick of the Northwest, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. Like, I don't like rain that much, and snow. I don't like being stuck in snow in my house. Like, this is terrible. And like, so, because it's up in like Seattle, right? So, and then my friends were like, we really need you to back at Activision. We really want you to work at Infinity Ward with us and make Ghosts. And I was like, okay. So then I did that and kind of missed a lot of what happened with Halo 5 after the fact. And then, I hear all the stories afterwards about it, but I never actually went back and like played it. So, yep. But I know enough of the criticisms and critiques about it, and I know, like, I was kind of sitting there thinking, like, I was like, you guys like built up this really big, like, Chief versus Locke kind of story. And then, like, you see like the meme kind of videos of like, Master Chief and Locke like getting into like this big fist fight. And that was kind of that was it. And I was like, yeah. And the reality is it's probably just a factor of like time and ambition, and like they just maybe ran out of runway. And like I said, some people had left. And so they were like, how do we make this game? And so they kind of did the best that they could with what they were given. But ultimately it is what it is,
There was a lot that I really enjoyed about Halo 4 with just, again, going into the Prometheans. Also, I know that this part, just as it applies to the narrative, you didn't have as much of a hand in, but I also really liked just where they took the relationship with Cortana and Master Chief. I love the juxtaposition that the story team was able to put together in terms of how she's an AI component, he's human, but yet at the same time, it's almost like he's more of the robot and she's more human, and how there is kind of almost an underlying codependency that's there that Master Chief has. And so by the end of Halo 4, of course, there's that big cliffhanger of how Cortana is no longer with Master Chief and that sort of thing. And it just, man, like, just Halo 4 to me was just such a triumph of a game. It really just, it pushed it where it needed to go. And Halo 5, in my opinion, unfortunately, it was nowhere near as good as Halo 4. Like there were certain key decisions that were made creatively that just, from a gameplay perspective of Halo 5, I know you haven't played Halo 5, but it didn't feel like Halo anymore. And it's the weirdest thing because I can't put my finger on it. It's not something that I can easily identify and say, oh, yep, because he does this, therefore it doesn't feel like Halo anymore. But
did they add aim down sights in 5?
I think they did.
That's probably something to do with it. Like so on Halo 4, they really tried to have us add aim down sights, and we were like totally against it. And the reason was, it's like, hey, it's not Call of Duty. You know what I mean? Like, Call of Duty is a stop and pop shooter, get behind cover, and Halo is a more like strafey, avoiding, and right kind of shooter. And so aiming down the sights is something you do when you're ready to like stop, in a way, and like shoot at something. And so, we actually had aim down sights at one point on Halo 4, and we took it out. And we had it in there, it broke the game because suddenly you're engaging AI completely differently. And it just changes the core game loop like drastically. So, and also the guns, the kind of canonical guns aren't really set up for it. Like you don't have like aim down sights on an AR. There's no like sight profile on that. Right. So, so those are, and this was like a last minute ad that wasn't any part of our, decision. I mean, eventually we got it out, but, and the reality was that it probably would have got added, except it got added so late that they couldn't polish it. So they had to take it out. But yeah, like things like that start creeping into other games, and you kind of have to wonder like what, it's going to affect the core loop in a big way. But then I think of like God of War, and I go, well, God of War is the good version of that, right? Where they really changed the camera angle, like they stuck to that, and I think it's better for it. So I don't think, it's like you shouldn't take risks, anything like that. But I think like just, I think the thought at the time was, hey, add aim down sights because other games, and that's like universally a bad way to go about it, So yeah.
What I'd like to do is actually change topics a bit and go a bit more into your past a bit, and as well as just some of your personal kind of approaches to things.
Sure.
Back when you were younger and in college, obviously you were honing your skills and whatnot. Can you identify which materials or people made significant impacts to you being able to quote unquote level up as a game designer? Like, I'm not even sure if you knew you wanted to be a game designer at that point in time, because obviously you started going into teaching, but
yeah.
Were there certain folks or just different things that, like, different events or experiences that you had that almost acted as catalysts?
Let me think about that. Cause like I said, like I've been kind of making games, since I was like a tiny kid. So like my mom, is a huge, oh, hey buddy. Sorry, we might have to do this because my dog just started like whining.
That's okay.
If you heard it. Hey buddy.
I heard it. You're a good boy.
You're okay. So I think my mom was probably like the single biggest influence, like early on, just because like she was like, hey, like, let's, make computer programs and stuff. And I think for my 10th birthday, she took, some old Atari game and like reprogrammed it. So like, it was one of those games where it was almost like a Zelda-like game, like the Zelda 1, where there's like different rooms and you'd go through each room and doorways. And then like, you could like get a key to unlock the next, like a door somewhere else. But she changed the keys to be like the letters of my name. And so I had to like collect my like name and then like unlock the pathway forward. So that was really cool. And so from a really early age, like I'd always been like thinking like, oh, of course you just change video games and make games. Like that's what everyone does. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, my dad was an artist. So as I got older, and kind of appreciated like his, the way he treats things creatively, like that's another kind of factor in that. So yeah, my parents had a, huge influence. They're both like creative people. But yeah, we always grew up around computers and stuff. My parents were very technical too. So it was kind of an odd thing for looking back on it to be like, cause I grew up in like rural Oregon, like a tiny town called Coos Bay. But to have like access to that was pretty special in hindsight. But and then I'm trying to think like when I was in high school and stuff, like I was just a normal high school kid. I played games, but I wasn't doing a lot in terms of making them anymore. I did some marathon stuff, middle school and whatnot, and then. Yeah. And then I got into college and I just took CS classes and I had a couple cool professors, but like they always pushed me away from games really. And so, it wasn't anything like they were just at the time, they weren't like, they didn't see a future in it. You know what I mean? Because they're like, one of them was like an ex-NASA, like, computer scientist, and somebody else was like a local, but kind of famous, computer scientist. And so they were like, and this was like when the .com bubble hadn't burst yet. And literally when I graduated, it burst. And so that was like part of the reason why I went into teaching. So they were like, oh, there's jobs everywhere. There's so many jobs. But yeah, so when I was modding and stuff though, like I would do a lot of IRC. Like I'd get on IRC and like talk to like whoever I could talk to that was making games. And there wasn't a lot of it, but I would talk to, and I don't even remember their like screen names or anything, but it was a lot of people from Splash Damage were on IRC. Because they were making Enemy Territory, like Return to Castle Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, which was like the follow-up to Wolfenstein. And even before that, because they had like a lot of knowledge around the Quake engine. And so, it's all Quake engine based. So I was like going to those people and going on to like forums and stuff and just talking to people online. And the good, like the really good modders at the time, and just trying to be like, hey, like check out my stuff, or like, how do I do this? And a lot of them were super nice about it and would help me out. And so, yeah, a lot of it was like just kind of mod community, and like also like people from Splash Damage in particular was like super cool. Yeah. And then once I got into the industry, I had a couple mentors that I ended up becoming like peers with, like people that, like I mentioned, like I think Mike Denny is a guy that he was like one of my kind of original leads at Gray Matter, and he was the guy that ended up finishing Zombie Mode out. But like, then I ended up being his boss later in life. So it's just kind of crazy how that all works out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is super cool. Sorry, I'm making a note of this.
No, it's all good.
What critical mistakes do some people make when they're starting out as game designers?
Oh man, there's so many. There's so many. I guess the first one is you think that like it's going to ship the way you made it. Like that never happens. Like everything always changes. Like I don't think I've ever taken anything that I've made and like it was like came out the way I thought it would. It always changes a bunch. getting too attached to what you're working on. Like you really need to like distance yourself creatively from things, and everything that goes along with that. Like when things get cut or they change and you're too attached to it, then you become frustrated or you take it personally. I think another thing that happens a lot with like just game developers in general is the way they critique stuff. So a lot of like kind of newer folks will just say like they don't like something or they think it's bad. They just say it's bad, but there's not like constructive criticism. Yeah. Like constructive criticism is always a lesson that has to be taught, and I've had to learn it a lot myself, but you say something and then hey, you're going to say it wrong. That upsets people. And it actually makes things like way worse than you thought,
Mm-hmm.
What else? I get this one a lot because I do a lot of like interviewing and hiring and stuff. Is like, I'll talk to students and they're like, I'm the creative director. And you're like, okay.
Of what?
Yeah. Of what exactly? And they're like, I'm the lead designer. And I'm like looking at their stuff and I'm like, oh no, like this, it's like, so I always tell people, I go, when you're applying for jobs, even if you're like, we're a creative director or like a lead or whatever on your student project, just like apply for the, like, say, like, if you're applying to be a designer, just say you're a designer, like don't try to come in like kind of with the big ego and stuff. Cause that just will not work. Mm-hmm. You're working with like tons of people that have been through far more. And that's just an immediate like turn off. Like they'll just be like, oh, this person's too immature or their ego's too big. I'm not even going to deal with it. So,
right.
So yeah, like that, those are some like just kind of core, like, like behavior type stuff. And that, a lot of designers and early developers get in trouble with, I think.
Now you've worked on, obviously we've gone through Call of Duty, we've gone through Halo. What would you say has been the high point of your career so far?
I mean, zombies is probably it, honestly, like just in terms of like, I never expected it to get that big, which is just insane to like see that now. And so, I can always look at that and go like, wow, like, I created this thing that like kind of set the world on fire and people still play it today. And then it got adopted by all the other Call of Duty studios, which I never saw that coming either,
Mm-hmm.
And then, but yeah, like, it's funny because I always like UO the most because it was like my first game. It's kind of like my first love, and just, it was like so cool to have like worked on that game and not know that Call of Duty, it was going to be so like, it was a Call of Duty game and what that was going to turn into. And I was just like, yeah, it's just chill. I really wanted to be like, wanted to be good at my job. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, it's chill, it's cool. And then like, and yeah, it turned into what it turned into. But,
it was pure is what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just nice. It was just no crunching really. And like, hey, there's a couple crunch around, a couple key milestones and stuff. And, there was some crazy stuff that I ended up doing. Like, like one of the other stories I like almost never get to tell is like when we were merging with Treyarch, they sent me over as the person to help teach Treyarch how to use the Call of Duty tool set, but they didn't tell anyone else at Gray Matter at the time. And they told me to keep it quiet. So I was like, okay, because
awkward.
They didn't. Yeah. So here I was like leaving in the middle of the day and they're like, where's the new guy going? And, and I was like, going to Treyarch and telling them like, here's how you're going to make Call of Duty. And then like months later, they're like, we're merging with Treyarch. And then like literally the producer that said, don't say anything goes, and Jesse, and he points at me, has been going over there for months and helping them. Oh. And everyone just like daggers, like, ah. And I was like, what? Like, why would you say that? And then a bunch of people like hated me for a little while after that, but they got over it. So
you feel your butthole pucker. You're like, ah.
Yeah. I was like, well, I'm going to be murdered in my sleep tonight. That's awesome. So,
yeah. Obviously, with going to the witness protection program starting now.
Exactly. Yeah.
But do you have any mentors over the years?
Not really. I mean, it's funny because I've ended up being the mentor for a lot of people, I think, and I keep getting put in these situations where it's like, you need to figure this out. Like, help us figure this out. You're the guy that needs to figure it out. So I'm always like the tip of the spear kind of person. Like when I came over to, like I said, like I was, my first year of making games, they're sending me to Treyarch to help them, make games. Right. And then like we merged. And then it's just like, make games now, make them fast. And you're just pumping out the games. And then, And then I'm trying to think like after that, but then it's like you get to this point where you're like around people that are like kind of your skill set and maybe like, you know, a little bit better, and you're just trying to like learn what you can from them, but they're also trying to learn from you too. So then you end up like quickly becoming peers, and you know, you just become friends and stuff. But and that's kind of like been the bummer for me, I think, when I look back on my careers. Like I wish I had like a Corey like Barlog or whatever from like, you know, like God of War, or like somebody that I could like really go to and be like this person's amazing. Like I can just trust everything, you know, like Neil from like Naughty Dog. Like I hear like all these crazy things, or like Neil and Bruce, you know, from Naughty Dog, where they would just like follow them off a cliff, you know, because they believe in what they're like, what they do so much, you know. And I you know, typically the creative directors that I've had, and I'm not saying like they're bad or anything, but they've been like kind of also thrust into similar situations where it's like they're out of their element a bit. Or maybe they're like they used to be an art director and now they're a creative director. So I can't really like learn a lot design wise from them. So yeah, it's been kind of one of those situations where it's just like I've been the one that's like having to, you know, and it was like I said, like, oh, okay, learn the Bungie engine. All right, cool. I'm going to do that now. You know, like I just keep being put in these situations where it's like tip of the spear, and haven't had a lot of time to do like reflection or like learn from others, kind of unfortunately. So.
But I mean, it sounds almost like it's kind of the reverse, where I'm sure there have been quite a few people who have gone under your wing and have been able to use you as more of a mentor capacity, because everything you're saying, I mean, you've been placed in this position time and time again where you're having to forge the way forward, the only way you know how, which is just to tinker with things.
Yep.
You know, and I mean, that's
true. Yeah,
that's something to be said for that. I mean, there are. I mean, at least in my life experiences, I can probably count on one hand how many people are capable of doing that, especially in your situation, because it almost sounds like it's almost like a repeated type of scenario. And not only is it repeated, but you thrive in that type of environment, I would say.
Yeah, it seems that way, huh? Yeah, it's like, like when 343 started, it was like, hire a team, you know, find talented people. And, you know, that's like another one of my skills is like I can identify good developers really quickly, you know, and it doesn't take long for me to like assess that. Usually you just have to ask them like, like about the games they've worked on and kind of like what problems they've solved. And usually you can quickly discern if like they were the one solving the problem or not, you know, and that's like a pretty good way to do it. But, yeah, it's funny because I've had people tell me like, hey, like, man, you could, like, I worked for you for like a year and now I'm at Bungie, and like really thanks for getting me in the industry and like teaching me the ropes and stuff. And so I get that from time to time, you know, and, you know, there's a few people that I still work with that are like, oh man, like you're like, I like really look up to you and stuff. And I'm just like, well, okay. Like, it's like weird for me, you know, like it's kind of like, okay, we're just working together. So let's just make cool games, you know? So
that's a great compliment though.
Yeah, it's cool.
I also wanted to touch really quick on one of the things I thought was fascinating that you talked about earlier was how you were using chess as kind of the basis for the Prometheans. And I'm just curious, from concept to completion of any game design, can you describe your process? Just I don't know. I'm thinking chess is probably a one-off for just Halo 4, but just what is your process?
It differs from game to game. You know, usually there has to be some sort of like, I mean, if it sort of depends, right? Like I have like side projects and stuff too, you know, that maybe one day I'll finish, but like usually there has to be like some sort of like spark, you know, something that like really like motivates you from the outset to like make the thing you're making. And then like I said, it differs from game to game, right? But I mean, Call of Duty and Halo are pretty similar in a lot of ways. Like you start out with kind of like probably some sort of like narrative that you want to tell, like some bigger story that you're trying to tell, and then some like place that needs to be told in. Because like I said, usually I've been working on like single player campaigns, and so that basically means story, right? They're all based around story. So you start with a story, and then you know, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but you know, usually like somebody at a high level or working with a design team says like, here's the kind of like place we want to be. It's like I'll use like Halo as an example. It's like, hey, it's going to be set after, we want to continue Master Chief's story. So it's going to be set after Halo 3. and what, and then it's like, what could that be? Open-ended, right? What could that be? And then you start to think about, well, what do we want to do differently this time? Like, where can we innovate? We don't want to just do what's been done before. That's just like copying design is like the worst thing ever. So, in terms of like creatively, like it's just boring, So, so then we start to think about like, well, what kind of environments do we want to be in? So we just start to like sketch out like different environment, like write them down or like think about different environments. What kind of gameplay do we want to do differently this time? Like, hey, let's add a new enemy class. That sounds cool. Okay, well that means, we got to use the hierarchical kind of Halo design. What is it? What's that going to look like for these guys? And then we start just doing like lots of concept, usually like lots of like mood pieces, sketches of like what the characters could look like, different enemies, that kind of stuff. And then like, things split off into different disciplines, right? So art will go do the concept-y stuff. Design will start kind of fleshing out levels. So they'll start to say like, okay, cool. We're going to be set, post Halo 3, and we've kind of divided up the game into maybe like 10 levels, into 10 different settings. That's cool. Oh, and like, hey, here's different types of gameplay that we want to do, like just mechanically, like here's different like things we want to have happen. Like we want to have like a vehicle level or whatever. This one's mostly based on flying, or we're going to introduce some like new weapons here. This is a good pacing. So, and then you try to like merge, like at least that's what I try to do. I try to merge like the places with like the mechanics and what makes the most sense, and then kind of look at that overall, and then figure out like what the pacing is going to be. So you want to make sure that you roll out with like, your early weapons early on. You don't want to like start with like, okay, everyone gets power weapons in the first level, typically, unless you're doing one of those things where it's like, you get all the cool stuff in the beginning and then we take it away. And then, like that you can do that design too. But, and then it's a lot like, okay, we're doing the first level like that, we got to think about tutorialization a lot. Like how do we get players into the game and really make it accessible? Like that's another kind of, when you were talking earlier about like, what do people do? What do early designers make mistakes of? It's like it's just like tutorialization and getting people into the game and making sure they understand how to play the game. Like that's a big part of design. But, so it's a lot of like taking those environments, taking mechanics, trying to see where things like fit together, and then creating pitches, basically just creating pitches for each level. Hey, I think this level is going to be cool because, and then PowerPoint presentation or like Word document with like lots of images in it that kind of details out like what the design of the level should be. And then there's a big back and forth, usually like, different creative people have to get involved and make sure that it syncs up with narrative and that kind of stuff. Creative director has to have sign off on it. And then, you basically go into production, right? You start making the thing. You assign people levels, usually you try to get people that pitch the level to be the people working on the level. And you start making it, and then it's like day in, day out, just like going through, different like milestones and checkpoints of like, okay, like first thing we got to do is, and this is the way I like to work, is like kind of get the whole level blocked in like really fast. So get the whole environment set, because you want to see like how, like, because I can play through a level that has no scripting in it in my head and just pretend that there's going to be all this cool stuff there one day and kind of get a rough idea of like how long that's going to be. And then, so I go, like, and then you're really trying to get a sense of scale as well. Like is like, are the objects, or the, in this world, are they the right size? And so you can scale everything up or down based on that. And then once that's kind of like a block in phase. And then once that's set, you start doing like like the next phase, which is like the detail like level. Like you start like detailing it. But it's like getting it up to like what most people consider alpha quality. Which is like, there's like a big difference between alpha and beta. Alpha is like playable and there's like some bugs in it, but it's basically like you could sit somebody in front of the game and they generally can't break it too bad, unless they go off the beaten path too crazily, then there's going to be problems and stuff. But if you kind of play what everyone calls the golden path, then you'll be fine. But it won't have like finished assets everywhere, but it'll have some. And that's typically what alpha is. So then what you do is like, you go through each section of the level and you just detail that out. Like, so you go like, okay, where do you want to start? And then usually it's like the beginning, and you say, okay, let's start at the beginning. And you spend like a couple weeks getting the first part up to alpha quality, and then the second part and the third part. And that level is kind of split up into a couple sections, And that usually takes like months of time, right? Like sometimes even like a year. And then that's where like the beat of the game, that's like full production, right? So now you're like in meetings with people and you're pushing verts back and forth, and you're taking guys in and out, and and then, oh no, we can't have this weapon anymore because the artists, something happened, and so now we got to take this weapon out. Well, that affects the design. You know what I mean? It's all that. That's all that kind of stuff, right? The back and forth of like making a game and all the iterative stuff. And then so then like a level will get up to like alpha quality, and then we'll usually like put it on the shelf because the game. There will be other bugs in the game that are bigger that like you can't like fully polish a level from the beginning. Usually you just can't. You don't have all this like systems in place, and there's might be other things going on in the game. So you kind of get it up to this point where it's like in a good state, but it's like not beta quality yet. And then you kind of do that for every level. And then, however the levels need to get done, they get done. And and then you sort of you have this like big moment where you get to play all the levels in like alpha, and that's really cool because you're like, this is the game. Like you can kind of see the whole game now. And that's a really like kind of big moment. And then you finish it, right? You like put the finishing art in, you fix all the bugs, you cut stuff, to like usually like first playable alpha time is like when you start to like remove things, right? And hopefully you've removed a lot of things before then, but this is where it's like the last like checkpoint of like, you have to cut things now because you have to finish them now, right? So if you don't cut it, you got to finish it. And if you're committing to finish it and you don't have enough people or enough time, then that means really bad crunch is coming, And I am so crunch averse at this point in my life. Like I don't want anyone to go through it. So I'm just fine cutting stuff. Like I'll just cut early and cut often. So
I actually have a follow-up question for you regarding that. I was just thinking about as you were describing this process. Actually, before I ask this question, did you have any other points that you wanted to make? Because I don't want to.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay. So one of the trends that I've noticed recently in games, and I have a bone to pick with this.
Okay. All right.
But so one of the trends I notice with a lot of developers these days is they are intentionally releasing games that are 50% done. I mean, they are straight up like Sea of Thieves is a great example where love the game. Microsoft and Rare especially has done a terrific job in creating like a sandbox type of scenario where it's literally like a social sandbox. A lot of fun to play, but the world is empty. There's just not a lot to do. And so you could tell as a result, they're having to scramble. They're trying to get the DLC out as fast as possible because people are realizing, hey, there's not really a whole lot to do here. Like what you have is at its core great. I mean, it's very addicting to play. It's fun to play, but there's just nothing to do. And I'm not trying to single Sea of Thieves out by itself. I'm just using it as an example, but it is something that I'm noticing more and more as these larger publishers and well-known developers, they start cranking these games out. I wanted to get your opinion on that. Well, what is your opinion as it applies to this new type of approach, I guess you could say, with games where it's very, I mean, you can tell it's designed to be 50 to 60% complete with the idea that then the remaining 40 to 50% is going to be kind of repackaged as DLC in order for the company to make more money.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think of like when you mentioned that, I'm like, my first thought was like early access games, like on PC, like there's a lot of that, and even like my current studio did that, right? With like H1Z1, they're like, okay, early access for H1. And it's a double-edged sword because if you're treating it like a beta, then it's fine. But if you're treating it as like something else, I think you run the risk of being off-putting to like your core like audience that you could potentially have, because like first impressions matter, right? Like it's like I say that a lot, but especially when you're making a game, like people sit down, they play this game, and if their first impression is like, oh, this is unfinished, then you've already lost them and you really can't get them back. Like it's like exponentially harder to get them back because there's so many other options for people to go engage in, right? Mm-hmm. So if your first impression isn't solid, then they're probably not coming back. And then you see exactly what you're talking about, where it's companies scramble to like try to fix it, but the war's already been lost. Like typically like it's already lost. Like there's no coming back from it, right? And like you can get like Hail Marys, right? Like you see like Fortnite's a great example of that, where they came out, it was like whatever, early access, etc. And it was their but they didn't have a battle royale mode. They just had like their co-op building, mode.
Right.
And nobody really played it. And then they got a second chance because they added BR, but that was like a fresh ad, right? And so then suddenly like stuff blew up. But if they would have just kept adding more and more to their co-op mode, I don't think anyone would have cared, And so, yeah, it's like, yeah, you're talking about Sea of Thieves. Like I think like PUBG like did the same thing where they're like early access for a while, but there was a little better because it's tricky, right? Like if you're going to do that, like your game has to be like already pretty well along and competent and fun. And if it's not, then it's like, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're just losing your audience right out the gate. So, I mean, my opinion is like, unless you're like have a close to finished game or that there's something super compelling about it and it just needs some finishing touches, then you should, don't do that, right? Like you're gonna end up losing your audience. Like, and that's how you make your money. That's how you keep people entertained, right? So, yeah.
I'd be curious to know too, just from a purely game design standpoint, if you were, say, for instance, you're working on a particular title and they come to you and they say, "Hey, Jesse, yeah, we love what you're doing, but we need to split this into half. So what we need you to do is create, take what you did, do a Diet Coke version of your game design, and then we're gonna bring in the second half of your game design as parts of DLC. But the only way that the player is going to be able to enjoy it is if they buy it." I mean, is that something that you would be in support of, or
No.
would you?
I mean, it sounds bad. Like just like as a game designer, like and I like look. There's like this whole business end of things that I typically don't get into, and I just leave the powers that be. I trust them to do that stuff, right? Like I just know how to make games, like but when it gets into like the economics of like when to release things and stuff, like, but I do know gamers, and I'm a gamer, and so I know what gamers like and don't like typically. And like, you see, like I see EA getting into all kinds of hot water over the pay to win stuff and whatever, right? Like the
right.
What is it? I forget the name of it. Like, but anyway, so like it was in one of their Star Wars games or something. But
yeah, Star Wars Battlefront 2 came out and they got into a lot of trouble with that because they were basically selling upgrades, like things that would like actually change up the dynamics of the gameplay itself. And so people could basically like, oh, well, if you spend an extra $100, then your character would be that much stronger, and it would effectively break the game design.
Yeah. Like I think of, it's like you pay for a $60 game, and like, I'm still old school. So like when I pay for a $60 game, I just want to be done. Like I rarely, if ever, even buy DLC anyway, just cause I'm like, well, I bought the game and I finished it and now I'm done, which is, it's, but there's a lot of people that buy DLC, right? And because they get invested in the game. But, I'm like a big fan of like, hey, like you paid $60, like that's the game. And, I'm okay with like free to play stuff, as well. Like if you do free to play, like I think of like League, I think League does a good job, like League of Legends, like it's free to play and you just kind of play it and do whatever. But then if you want to have certain champions, then you have to basically buy them. Otherwise, you can play them when the weekly, you can play them if they're up for that week or whatever. And so you're like, okay, that's cool. Like I'll just, like I'm not paying anything yet. So that's fine. I'll pay a couple bucks to buy a champion that I like and learn that one champion. And then you feel like, well, dude, this was cheap, man. I was only like $5 or $6, $7, whatever. Like, I'll buy another one. I'll buy another one. Right. And then you get invested in the character and it's like, oh, cool. Like I like these skins. And then next thing you know, you've paid like $60, but you feel rewarded for it, right? Like you don't feel like you're being taken advantage of because you're kind of buying the things you want anyway, mm-hmm. And you're kind of doing it like then there's no way to buy every champion and every skin anyway, right? So then that would be just cost prohibitive on Riot's end because they spend a lot of time making that stuff and they have just a ton of content in their game, really, in terms of champions and like enemy design and stuff. So. Yeah, like, but if somebody came to me and said like, "Hey, split up your design," and I'd be like, "Well, like, why? First of all, like, 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 are we are we going to make more money or less money? And also, are people going to be mad at me or are they not going to be mad at me? And like, because these things matter to me, So it would come down to that. And if somebody could make a good like economic argument and where people weren't upset at me, then sure. But that's not going to happen where they say like, split the design in two and then like make the fun part be paid for. So
yeah. Now a fun question for you. what are some of your all-time favorite games?
Oh man. Let's see. So I always pull out these really old ones that like no one's heard of. Like games like Jumpman for like the Atari, which is like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. Which is like one of the first like probably the first platformer. And like, there's a game called Miner, like 49er, like 2049, like always call it Miner 49er. It's another like platformer. And so that like, those are just burned into my brain as like when I was a kid of like, these are like, oh my God, like Jumpman was amazing because you were just this little, stick figure guy. They had really cool animations. Like the animations are better than like a lot of games out like now that are like platformers and stuff. And it was just like every level was like a cool like puzzle that had different mechanics in it. And it's really just like really boils down like platforming game design into like its core. Like you'll have these like bullets that like slowly move through the world because it's basically like it's like a 2D platformer, and each level is just it's one screen. You can't like move like Mario or anything like that. It's just like the screen is the level, and they have like it's like you're a tiny little stick figure guy that's like maybe I don't know like an inch tall, and then you have like these different like layers of like ground basically, and there's like no background, right? It's like Atari game, so it's just like one color background with like these different, but then each level is split up. They have like the way that the geometry is laid out is different. They have different enemy types in each level, and then those enemy types change up gameplay. So like there's one so it's like, for example, they like I was saying, they introduce you with these little bullet like movement, so these like bullets slowly move through the world, but if they see you, then they like it plays this like crack sound, and it like comes shooting at you, and you try to like jump over it or whatever, and there's like ladders and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then there's like these like flashing blocks that show up, and you're like, and they're doing the same behavior, and then but if they hit you, they force you to jump, so like you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then eventually you get in these levels where there's like tons of holes everywhere, and there's tons of these like flashing blocks, and so like if they hit you, then they force you to jump off the level and into holes and stuff, and you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And there's like ropes, so you can be like climbing ropes, and then suddenly this like thing hits you, and it like forces you to jump off the rope, and you die and whatever, and you get like multiple lives and stuff. And then there's all kinds of other crazy enemies, like they introduce like vampires and like bats and all kinds of just crazy fun stuff. But so yeah, Jumpman is like one of those games where like I can still like put the Atari stick in my hand and like feel it, like just sort of if I close my eyes, I'm like, oh, this game is like it's so fun to play. And then like another old game is like Mule. Like, have you ever heard of Mule? It's like an old like Electronic Arts game. But
I don't think so. Well, what's it about?
So this is another crazy game where you start out, you pick like one of many alien races, and they each have different like trading abilities, and you then I think you pick, so then it shows, and so then you pick your race, and it's like, okay, cool. Now you're going to pick plots of land on this map, and this like square like moves across like a 2D map of this like, top down like world. And when you hit the button, it selects that plot of land, and that becomes your plot of land. And then every other AI character it's a 4-player game, so then other players can do it too. And they're trying to like select a plot of land before you. So you're trying to get like the most prized land before they do. So there's kind of like a bit of a like buzzer, like almost like a game show mechanic where you have to hit the buzzer before other people to get like the plot of land near the river or whatever, because it has more minerals. And then you go into this like, and then you can like actually walk around in the 2D space, and like, you can add like little tiny things like different like solar farms and stuff. But, then you go into this like trade, and then it goes into like a trading sim where like like there's kind of like a turn ends after you've selected your plot of land, and you can like put like upgrades on your land, and then you get resources based on what you've done for that turn. And then you go into this like trading sim aspect where you and the other alien races are now saying like, well, I have this much, solar power, and you have this much like coal or whatever. I don't remember what the actual elements were, but then you're like buying and selling them based on rarity and stuff. And then you go back.
Sounds like Settlers of Catan. Have you ever played that?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah. And then your plot of land gets bigger, and it behooves you to get land that's closer to your land because you get bonuses for that. And, again, based on your alien race, you get like different bonuses. So if you're near the river and you're this one type of alien, you get more bonuses than if you're somebody else and you're out in the mountains, you get like mining bonuses and stuff. So, and so that was like, it's kind of weird because there's never really been a game like it that I can think of, but it's such a cool, unique, like kind of it involves like almost like real-time strategy elements kind of, but then also like trading and economics. And like, it's competitive as well. It's a really fascinating game. And then, other games, of course, are like Return to Castle Wolfenstein and like Marathon, because those are like some shooters that I played when I was a kid and like modded them and like really have like just this like affinity for them and like really memorable, like good memories or good emotions around those games. And then I think like Mega Man, like because I love Mega Man. Like
love me some Mega Man.
Yeah, original Mega Man design is just like so good, and that's another one that like no games really touch it in terms of design. Like they're so unique, like picking different bosses that allows you, and you can do it in any order. So like I don't know, like I'm always drawn to these games that have a lot of agency, like player agency. Like you can just kind of, it's like more freeform, like you can like. Because I always think about games as like it's an interactive medium. Like that's kind of what makes games special. And so the more you let players have control over what they're doing, the more it feels like a video game to me. And the better games, in my opinions, are the ones that have more agent. Like mine, I still like Minecraft. Like Minecraft is just do whatever, and that's great. But they do have game mechanics in it. Like they have enemies and villagers that you can trade with and all that kind of stuff. So. Yeah, and then like I like a lot of competitive games too. Like I used to play a lot of League, and I kind of got to the point where people just got mad at me because it's like like you get into like competitive situations and people are like, oh, you're not playing your lane right, or you're not playing this champion wrong, and it just gets old after a while. The kind of toxicity around competitive gaming is real. And like I mentioned, like I got a wife and a kid and dog and all that stuff. Like I don't need that. Like I don't need the negativity. So. And yeah, I play a lot of Overwatch now. Like I love Overwatch.
Love me some Overwatch. If you listen to Joygasm, man, we talk about Overwatch almost every episode.
Yeah. So I just recently got back into it because my buddy. So I played it when it first came out. I played like the first 2 competitive seasons, and then I kind of just stopped. I was like, they're not adding anything, and they didn't add anything for those first 2 seasons. Then I think they what's her name? Is it Anya? Which is the one where she's like the
Anna.
support? Anna. Yeah, Anna. That's like kind of where I stopped playing because I used to play a lot of Widow, and I was like, oh, cool, support sniper, and then I just never got the hang of her, so I just kind of stopped playing. And then my buddy was playing on PS4 a lot, and he's really good. He's like Diamond, I think, on PS4.
Oh, nice.
And then I'm like, yeah, let's play PC. So we start playing PC, and he plays with like a controller on PC, and we're playing quick play, and he was just dominating. He's just wrecking people. And so we finally unlocks comp, and we're like, all right, let's do competitive play. And and then he gets in there, and we're just like I think we placed in gold, and now we're like in silver again. And he's like, what's happening? And I'm like, dude, PC is a whole different beast, man. And like PS4, they have auto aim and stuff systems. Like it's different. So he plays a lot of like Diva, and like the new meta is like very anti dive, and so if you're playing like, it's like Brigitte, like who's the, oh dang, I just forgot his name. I should know his name. The guy with the bow and arrow.
Hanzo.
Yeah, Hanzo. It's like Hanzo, Brigitte or whatever meta right now.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like very anti-dive, and so yeah, it's tough for him to adapt, I guess. But he's coming along.
I love Overwatch.
Overwatch is fun. I play a lot of Roadhog too, and Roadhog is like first 2 seasons of Roadhog were like awesome because you could rope people from anywhere, chain them from anywhere, and like now it's like I miss like everything, and like geometry like stops my hook, and I'm just like, what is this? Like, this is a different game now. So they
definitely keep tweaking with it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yep. That's good. I mean, you got to keep the meta fresh, right? Like, yeah, I actually see this pattern of like game makers. Blizzard does it, League does it, where when they release a new champion into the meta, they're a little bit OP. And I think they do that on purpose because gamers love to play OP characters. And they'll flock to them. And then that kind of upsets some other people. But what it does is it cements that character's role in the universe. And then later they can like nerf them. But like they do that time and time again, like League especially. Like you're like, okay, here's this new. Okay, let's play the new one. And then if you can learn it really fast, you can dominate. And then eventually they nerf it, and then it like becomes more balanced. But it's kind of a tricky tactic they use, I think.
And every one of the characters that they've come out with, I don't know how recently you've been playing it, but I mean they also released Moira recently, which is a pretty sweet character too.
Yeah, I need to learn her. I'll play Mercy or like Lucio, like usually if I'm doing support stuff, but I think Moira would be cool. Start to learn some Moira. Yeah.
Now, would you like to see a return of certain classic game designs that were prominent back in the 8-bit and 16-bit days? Because you were talking about Atari, and I was surprised actually by just the number of games that were your all-time favorites. And I started thinking as you were describing it, how back in the day, you really, as a studio, you had to rely pretty heavily on game design just because you didn't have all the flashy graphics. You didn't have all this memory and space and whatnot to be able to have all these other types of art departments, whether it's the environment or it's the characters or whatever else. I mean, everything was actually quite crude and simple looking. And so really, I mean, the game play mechanics really had to stand on its own in order for a game to be successful. I mean, is there something that you'd like to see a return to, or perhaps I don't know, is there a certain type of gameplay mechanic that you'd like to see be used in more of a next gen title?
That's a tough question, because there's a lot of, like, when I think of like game design, I always go back to like what children play on the playground actually. So like I think of stuff like tag, like Call of Duty multiplayer is effectively like a game of tag. Like it's like cops and robbers, or like stealth games are basically like hide and go seek, like kids play hide and go seek. So like a lot of game design is just based on what people already play as kind of games when they're like kids, and then, I mean, it's funny because I always think that like actually, oh man, I forgot to mention one of my all-time favorite games is Kerbal Space Program actually, but like sim style games, like games where you can just like do all these like crazy things, but they're like based on like flight sims and stuff like that. I used to play a lot of flight sims when I was a kid, and they just like disappeared. And they became more like tools to train people how to fly planes, but and I don't know if that's just a factor of like when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of games, period. And so flight sim was just another piece of software that seemed like a game. So I started like playing it, I guess, but it wasn't really a game though. I mean, I guess they had missions and stuff, but yeah, like I'm kind of surprised like those games disappeared. But then I think about it and I go, they're pretty technical. Like people, they're not very accessible, And games have just become more and more accessible over time. Like now, like mobile gaming is so huge. And I remember when mobile gaming didn't exist at all. And I was kind of thinking like, yeah, like I remember thinking like naively, like games will never be that big on mobile because it's a phone, and it'll, like, who wants to play a game on a phone? And then like fast forward like 10 years and it's like, okay, Fortnite's on the phone now, like like that's crazy. So it's like games that just keep getting better and better, really, and more accessible. And but I miss playing like those kind of like hardcore, like I used to play a lot of Civilization, like, and I know Civ is still gets made, but you never hear about it anymore like you used to. Like it's and those are just like, like almost like board games in a way, right? I'm trying to think, like, I really like I play, like, there's this board game I play from time to time called Bang, which is like kind of like a cops and robbers style game, but you're like it's like the sheriffs and the deputies versus the outlaws, but you don't know who's who, and you kind of reveal that over time. So I kind of like wish there were more games where it was like more like Overwatch does this, but like asymmetrical gameplay where like you're like different classes that kind of all somehow balance against each other, but can live in the same space and play against each other. Like Overwatch is like, I'm going to talk about Overwatch more, but it's like this great like design achievement that you have that many, in like League as well, where you have that many champions or characters or whatever that all somehow fit together and are balanced against one another. Like that's right. Like so hard to do. That's so hard to do. And people don't give, I don't think people understand how difficult that is to do and to get right. And so I really like respect games that do that a lot. Like, it's just like, oh man, like, and I'm like jealous. I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that somehow, like maybe one day I'll make a game like that. But so like games with like a lot of asymmetry that somehow balance each other out. And also just like more like big sandboxy games, but like those are always like those come and go. Like it's almost like this pendulum that swings. Like right now it feels like it's like BR is big, but also like, oh, God of War is like this like huge achievement. and like single player games are going to start coming back. I feel like, even because right now,
awesome.
But everyone's down on single player games right now. They're like, oh, this is the death of single player games. And, you saw like, the EA game, I think it was EA, the Star Wars game got canceled, the Visceral game.
Yes, actually, I was kind of bummed to hear about that.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that's not like single player games' fault. Like, there's a lot of stuff that was going on at the studio, and back and forth stuff. I mean, games are getting harder to make. That's kind of the other problem. Is like these big single player games are requiring like way more assets, resources, people's time to get made as like the complexity of the game goes up, right? In terms of like, just whatever, like graphics and physics systems and what gamers expect out of them, right? And each game is kind of upping the bar over the next one. And so like games aren't getting any easier to make. But I don't know, man, like, I don't know. Somebody should make a Mule. Somebody should reboot Mule. Somebody should reboot Jumpman, maybe. I don't know.
You're the guy to do it. Come on,
yeah,
Josh.
Yeah. I'll go buy the IP somehow.
There you go.
Probably EA still owns it. Yeah.
One of the things I forgot to even like get into as we were talking about your career. What are you currently working on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of those things like, hey, I can't answer it. So.
Oh, okay. That makes it easier. I don't feel so bad.
Yeah.
What's the name of the company you work for right now?
Daybreak Games. So they're in San Diego.
Daybreak Games.
Yep.
Okay.
And they recently came out with H1Z1, which is like which is funny. I commiserate with a lot of the people there because, I made the zombies and all that stuff and like people changed the story, but H1Z1 is another game. They were really the first studio to make BR. Like they made BR before BR and they were actually, it was big for a while. Like H1Z1 was actually really big for a while. But then, PUBG came out and kind of ate their lunch and, the H1 team didn't adapt fast enough or whatever. And so now when you read about like it's like, oh, BR, PUBG made BR, but it's like, no, H1 was like before PUBG. But they kind of get written out of the narrative, which bums me out. But yeah, so they make H1, they made EverQuest. They still own and make EverQuest, PlanetSide. I think there's a few other like kind of small. I think they made like one of the Star Wars games, Star Wars MMOs. Yeah, so it's funny because their history is mostly in like massively multiplayer, kind of games. And I mean, the reason I moved, part of it was like I was just tired of Call of Duty, and it was kind of like the same thing. Like every 5 years, seems like I'm like like I just don't want to do the same thing anymore, and want to try something creatively different and so on. And then this opportunity opened up, and it was like it was still in SoCal, but it was San Diego, which is like very different than Los Angeles. If you
dude, I love San Diego.
Yeah, San Diego's amazing. So, and I always told myself I wanted to retire here. So then I was like, oh, I could get a job there. So, yeah, and just creative director there, and kind of on an unannounced project, and working with some people that I've worked with for a long time. Brought them over and trying to make something cool, and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Who knows?
You realize you're going to have to come back onto the show when the game is like announced so we can actually geek out properly over it.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, when it comes to E3 is right around the corner. Are there any games that you're looking forward to seeing at this year's E3?
I don't know. I haven't like been that, I haven't been paying too close of attention. So they announced, cause I saw that, here's what I saw that a bunch of stuff got leaked, like Rage 2 got leaked. Right. And then I saw just like a bunch of other stuff, and I was like, to me, they seem like a lot of games, at least the stuff I saw leaked were like sequels of games that have already been made. So and then usually like I get excited at E3 when like I see the big reveal of some crazy new thing that people want to try it and do, So, but I don't know what's like what you tell me, like what's some stuff that has been announced or.
So Death Stranding has been obviously teased over the last several years.
Oh, and, funny. I can't make sense of what that is, though. I have no idea.
I can't either. I have no idea. I'm like, oh my gosh, the production values are amazing, but I have no idea like what's going on. So I think I would be surprised if we don't see something like that. I heard something from the Sony camp. I think that they're going to try and make it kind of one of their cornerstone games where they're going to actually show gameplay as opposed to just these little story cinematics. I mean, that's one I'm definitely looking forward to seeing. What was the other one? Oh, CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 is supposed to make their big debut. That one's been in development forever. I'm a huge Witcher 3 fan. I think that they've done a fantastic job with that.
That's right.
I'm just a huge Cyberpunk fan. I cannot wait to see what they come up with that.
That's going to be interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how far along it is and like how much they have done. But yeah, Witcher, like those guys are really good. So like much respect. Like, yeah, one of the times I did like, you know, big PR for Call of Duty stuff, they sent me to Poland and like I didn't get to meet those guys, but like the fans in Poland, you can imagine, are like, they just love those guys so much, you know, like, oh, Witcher, you know, and what's Gwent and all that stuff, man, they're crazy. But yeah,
Gwent's actually a really fun game too. Have you played that?
No, I used to play a lot of like the Xbox Magic games and that kind of stuff, and then I kind of petered out of that. But it's one of those games I do want to go try it out. There was a point where like card games were becoming a big thing, and then those seem to have like died off a bit, you know. Even like I remember like Titanfall had like a mechanic around cards, like burn cards or something, and I was like, and I know that those guys play a lot of like some of them play Magic, so I think they got inspiration out of that. But I thought like card games were going to make this big resurgence, and then they just sort of died off, like video game card games or whatever. But
Red Dead Redemption 2 is another big one.
Oh yeah, that I'm stoked about. Yep. Although the trailer, I gotta admit, the trailer didn't get me excited. Like I was like, oh, Red Dead, I'm going to buy this game. I just know it because the other one was so amazing. I just, you know, and then I'm like, all right, show me what you got. And I'm like, I didn't know which character was who and like what they were actually like talking about, or like, you know what I mean? I couldn't follow if there's a narrative there, because it was just, to me, like, you know, whatever, like, I'm not trying to be negative, but it just felt like generic. Like, it's like, no,
it's fine.
We're going to get those guys and you better watch out, you know? And there wasn't anything memorable about it. So, but I'm still going to buy it. I'm still going to play it. I'm still going to love it, I'm sure. So.
It's Rockstar. Anything they're going to do is going to be amazing. And plus, too, I think at E3, I'm sure they're going to actually have like
Rockstar's hard to get into, though. Like Rockstar's booth is always like closed off, can't get in, like walled off, like black walls, like no entry. Like, yeah. But yeah, I think it's going to be cool.
The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, I'm not a big Last of Us fan, for what it's worth. And it's not like I don't respect what they do. I'm like, it's funny, like third person stealth games are like the lowest on my list typically of games I need to go play. Like I'm more of like a like I mentioned, like I'm into Kerbal, or like I like Overwatch, you know, like I like shooters, and then like Sims, and then like eventually I'll get to like third person games, and then like third person stealth games. Like I know that's like blasphemy, but what's the like Dishonored? Like I'm not like into Dishonored at all. Everyone's like, Dishonored's amazing, and I'm like, I just can't, because I try to like shoot my way through those games because I'm more action oriented, you know. And then like if the mechanics don't support me shooting through it, then like it just like punishes me, and then I'm like, okay, I'm out. Like, or I'll play a little bit to get what I can get out of it. Although I did like what was the Splinter Cell game where like any of the more recent Splinter Cell games I think have been more action focused, which I prefer, you know, which has been cool. But
speaking of, there's actually a heavy rumors that Ubisoft is going to be showing off a next gen Splinter Cell this year's E3.
That's cool. Yeah. Or like and then like Siege is cool. Like Rainbow Six Siege, that's another great game that like they put out. Yeah. Like I just like I like shooters. Like if it's a first person shooter, I'll probably play it. You know, I love first person shooters the most, really.
I'm curious if Halo 6 is going to make an appearance.
That's what, it's funny. Like me and my buddies are like speculating, you know, because we don't have a lot of, you know, contact there anymore, but we're like sitting here thinking like they better like reveal something soon. Cause it's like, you know, what are they doing otherwise, you know?
I think it's about time because they didn't show anything last year. I don't even know if they showed anything the year before that. I think it's just time.
My prediction is you'll see some sort of like really like teasy, like in the Microsoft Xbox presser thing. They'll just like Bonnie will get out on stage and she'll like say like, you know, Halo's coming, don't worry, you know, whatever. We love our fans, and then she'll come out and like it'll just be like a piece of concept art or, like a quick little video of something that doesn't completely make sense. And then the fans will go crazy about it, and like speculate and like, yeah, that's my guess.
Gears of War 5 is rumored also to make an appearance. I'm not sure if you're a third-person shooter fan, but
so I like Gears. I'll actually like Gears a lot. I think it's a pretty fun game. I mean, I like that it has co-op. Honestly, like when I played that game, I'm like, let's play some co-op, But I didn't play 4. 3 was the last one I played. So anyway, but yeah, like if it's like, it's funny because it's like Assassin's Creed. Like I like Assassin's Creed, but I can't play it every year because it's just too. I like wife and kid like don't have time to sink 60 hours into like these.
I know
games.
Exactly what you're talking about. I have a wife and kid too.
Yeah. So like I remember when I was a kid, I used to be that's like amazing, but now I'm older, I just can't do that anymore. So I can't play like every Assassin's Creed game. So I kind of like selectively go like, okay, like this is the one that's getting like good Metacritic, like people are saying good things about it. Like I'm gonna figure out what's different about this game because like each like Assassin's Creed game or whatever, there's usually not a whole lot that changes from year to year. And same with Call of Duty, right? It's like there's a lot of, but then it's like you want to see like where they tried some new stuff out or where like people thought that this new feature was cool, so they, you know what I mean? Like so, and just for like research purposes, and so I can get inspired. That's how I tend to look at like playing games anymore.
Yeah.
Well, very cool, man. I want to just thank you for taking your time. I know that this is your time off away from your wife and kids. So give them a heartfelt thank you for me. I know they don't know who I am. They're gonna be like, "Who's that?" But
it's all good.
But no, seriously though, thank you for taking the time to be able to talk to me about all this stuff. This has just been a fantastic chat with you.
Oh yeah, no problem. It was fun.
Love to have you come back on in the future, especially when you're able to talk about your new project. Because now I'm all. You piqued my interest. I'm like, what's he working on? How can I get him to spill the beans?
That's right. It's our job. Keep you guessing.
That wraps up this episode of Joygasm. I really hope everyone enjoyed this exclusive interview with Jesse. If you have any questions or comments for him, you can ping Jesse on Twitter at @TheJesseSnyder. Make sure you tune in next week when Steve returns and we give our review of Solo, a Star Wars Story. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to check out patreon.com/Joygasm and pledge $1 a month for exclusive access to the show. Also, you can follow us on social media and YouTube. Just do a search for Joygasm TV. In addition to iTunes and Android, you can listen to our podcast on TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud.com/JoygasmTV. Last but not least, search Joygasm TV on Twitch to see us stream our gaming adventures live every Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. We'll see you next week.